That afternoon, the Colorado sky sank into a red glow, as if the last warmth of the day was holding on. Naomi Rivers sat in the back of the wagon, her hands clasped so tightly the knuckles blanched. The dirt road stretching west felt endless, and every turn of the wheels lifted another layer of gray dust onto her dress. She knew this journey was not leading her toward a new life. It was carrying her away from herself. For 2 weeks, her father had stayed silent, his eyes hollow from the long drought. That morning, he spoke 3 words. "You must go." And Naomi understood. They had run out of choices. To save the ranch, she, their only daughter, had to become the final bargaining piece. When the wagon stopped at Wright Ranch, Naomi felt her heartbeat falter. The wooden house stood alone in the span of sunburned grass, each board carrying the fatigue of years of hard wind. The man waiting on the porch mirrored that same worn stillness. Calder Wright, 29, widower, quiet. He looked at Naomi not with the eagerness of a man about to gain a wife, but with the eyes of someone familiar with loss, enough to know not to expect anything anymore. His gaze passed over her, paused a moment on her trembling hands, then moved away, as if he feared that looking longer would be selfish. "Come inside," he said. His voice was low and rough, tired, not cold, only drained. Naomi stepped in. The scent of old wood and a faint trace of lavender tightened her chest. No one needed to say it. She knew that fragrance belonged to the woman who once stood in this place, his late wife. Dinner was simple: bread, stew, a bowl of hot soup. Calder spoke only of the ranch, the weather, and that he would not force anything upon her. Naomi answered softly, trying to steady her voice. In the corner, a pair of small eyes watched her. A girl about 4, hair tousled, arms wrapped around a worn doll. When Naomi turned toward her, the child hid behind her father's leg. "This is Maisie," Calder said quietly. The girl said nothing, and no one had to explain. Her mother's death had taken her voice with it. Now and then Naomi caught Maisie's gaze, dark, wary, carrying something thin as hope. That look made Naomi set her spoon down just to breathe again. After dinner, Calder led her down the hall. "Your room is here," he said. He called her "you," but his tone felt like he was holding a needed distance, afraid of touching anything too fragile. Naomi stepped inside. A plain bed, a white curtain, a window facing the fields. Everything was neat, yet faintly marked by the woman who lived here before. The bedsheet, the small wooden box on the table. Naomi touched the edge of the blanket, feeling the strange weight of stepping into someone else's life, where everything already had its place, and she was set down like a replacement object. The door closed softly behind her. Naomi sat on the edge of the bed, her shoulders lowering as the stone weight she had carried all day finally broke open. In the wall beside her, Calder's footsteps reached his own room, then stopped. Only a thin wooden wall stood between them. Yet Naomi felt an entire world lay in the space that separated them. Outside, the evening wind swept across the open fields, carrying the cool breath of the coming night. Naomi pulled the blanket closer and closed her eyes. But the image of the child hiding behind her father, Calder's worn gaze, and her father's words that morning pressed into her mind like thorns. The first night of this new life, a life she never chose, closed with the sound of wind, the creak of wood, and the quiet distance between 2 strangers who had become husband and wife on paper. The first morning at Wright Ranch arrived with pale light falling through the window, waking Naomi before the rooster could crow. She sat up, wrapped a thin shawl around her shoulders, and let her feet touch the cold wooden floor. A reminder that this was not home, not hers, not chosen. But somewhere inside, a faint voice told her she had to begin somewhere. When Naomi stepped into the kitchen, Calder was already there, holding a cup of coffee. His gaze turned toward the misted fields. He nodded, slow, as if afraid of startling her. "Good morning," he said. His voice held that same rough edge from too little sleep. She answered with a small smile and started preparing breakfast. Her hand brushed his when she handed him a glass of water, a fleeting touch, but enough for both to halt for half a second. Calder looked away at once. Naomi felt her heartbeat flare, not from fear, but from how close they stood for two people trying not to be hurt again. Maisie sat in the corner with her doll, her watchful eyes following Naomi's every move. She ate slowly, as if waiting for permission. Naomi reached to smooth a stray curl on the girl's forehead. Maisie didn't pull back, but her small body tensed, like a young bird unused to any hand. The wooden house, once cold, grew warmer under the sound of pots and pans, the scent of simmering soup, and Naomi's quiet work. Dust that had settled for seasons was wiped away, the tablecloth replaced, the windows opened to let the wind in. Calder noticed all of it, but said nothing. At times he passed by the kitchen, stopping as if he meant to speak, then thinking better of it. Naomi saw that awkwardness, a kind of gentleness held back by fear. Near noon, hoofbeats sounded from afar. Naomi looked up to see 3 women riding toward the porch. Their dresses drifted in the breeze, their posture stiff, their eyes sharp from too much practice in judging others. "We just came to see the new bride," one said, her smile thin as a blade. Naomi stood straight, hands placed on her apron, no bowing, no retreat. Another woman looked her over and murmured just low enough to wound, "Wright does know how to choose. She's nothing like the last one." Everyone understood the meaning. Naomi's skin was darker. Calder's past was lighter. They wanted her to feel misplaced on land that was supposed to be hers now. But Naomi simply smiled, calm enough to unsettle them. "I wish you ladies a good day," she said, her voice soft but steady. Calder had appeared behind her without a sound. He stood slightly angled, forming an invisible barrier between Naomi and the sharp tongues outside. "If you came for rumors," he said slowly, "I have nothing to offer." No anger, just finality. The women withdrew, leaving a trail of whispers behind them. When the gate closed, Naomi exhaled deeply. Calder looked at her longer than usual. His eyes held gratitude, and something gentler, as if he was beginning to see she was stronger than he expected. Evening passed in quiet warmth. Naomi washed dishes while Calder chopped firewood outside. The fading light fell across his shoulders, casting a long shadow stretching to the porch. She watched him a moment longer than she meant to. Maisie sat on the rug, doll in hand, her gaze fixed on Naomi as if afraid she would vanish if she looked away. When Naomi bent to pick up a fallen cloth, Maisie stepped closer, very slowly. The girl leaned her head against Naomi's leg, not a hug, just a small touch, as if testing whether the ground beneath her was safe. Naomi knelt and gently brushed the girl's hair. Then, with a voice trembling like a new leaf in the wind, Maisie spoke her first word since her mother died. Ma. Naomi froze. The kitchen fell silent as though the wind had been stopped outside. Calder turned, eyes wide, as if he couldn't believe what he heard. Naomi didn't know how to answer. She only placed a hand on Maisie's back, as carefully as one touches a healing wound. It was the first breath Wright Ranch had taken in a long time. Soft, fragile, real enough that Naomi felt something shift inside her. The days that followed drifted by like underground water moving through the earth. Quiet, unhurried, yet steady enough that even Naomi didn't realize she was changing Wright Ranch with every breath. Calder noticed it first, not from the warmer kitchen or the house losing its damp smell, but from Maisie herself. The girl, once withdrawn like a small shadow, now followed Naomi step for step. When Naomi sewed, Maisie sat beside her. When Naomi swept the yard, the child sat on the porch with her doll, watching. Her gaze was no longer fearful, but held a soft trust, like early mist settling over dry fields. One afternoon, Calder stood by the horse barn, watching them from a distance. Naomi sat on the porch floor, her head slightly tilted as she mended a small dress for Maisie. The girl leaned close, her knee touching Naomi's leg. It seemed she had found a new sense of safety in the arms of a woman who never imagined she would become a mother. Calder gripped the barn rail. Gratitude and displacement wove together inside him. The feeling of a man standing at the threshold of warmth, but afraid he didn't deserve to enter. That evening, Naomi was washing dishes when her eyes caught the shawl her mother had placed on the table. The scent had faded, but the longing had grown sharper than usual. Suddenly, she covered her mouth as tears burst through like a cold wind sweeping across her back. She tried to hold them in, but a small, broken sound escaped. Calder stepped into the kitchen at that moment. He stopped short, as if afraid his presence alone would hurt someone again. "Naomi, is something wrong?" His voice was so low she couldn't tell where concern ended and uncertainty began. She wiped her face and shook her head, though her shoulders kept trembling. "I just miss home." A simple sentence, heavier than any complaint. Calder touched her shoulder, for the first time. Not hesitant, but not rushed. His hand was warm, roughened by years of labor, yet carrying an intact gentleness. Naomi looked up, her eyes still wet. They both stayed silent. No avoidance, no closeness forced. Only close enough to hear each other's breathing fill the small kitchen. The next day, Naomi carried a basket of eggs to sell in town. She went alone because Calder was working the fields. But Pine Ridge was not kind to strangers, especially a black woman who had become the wife of Calder Wright, the man half the town had wished to claim. Whispers followed her like long shadows pressed to the ground. "Who does she think she is, walking into that house so fast? They say Calder married her just to watch the child. Quick, isn't it less than a month after Sarah died?" Naomi did not bow her head, but each step grew heavier. When she stepped out of the general store, a group of women blocked the doorway. One raised an eyebrow. "Wright's new bride comes to buy salt. Don't know if it's for cooking or to rub into someone's face." Naomi held a polite smile. "I'm only doing my work." But before they could answer, a low voice came from behind her. "That's enough." Calder. He stood there, tall, breath hard as if he had hurried. His eyes were cold enough to silence all three women. "Naomi has done nothing to you," he said, "and her dignity isn't yours to touch." Naomi felt her heartbeat shift. Not because he defended her, but because of the way he said her name. Steady, sure, as if naming something that mattered. On the ride home, neither spoke. Some silences are heavy. Others are warmer than words. When the wagon bumped over the dirt road, Naomi realized Calder was watching her. He turned away at once, but this time she had seen it. The look lasted longer than usual, softer than usual, more honest than anything he had ever said. Naomi had grown used to the rhythm of life at Wright Ranch. Early mornings by the stove, afternoons with sunlight slanting across the porch, and long evenings filled only with the wind running through the fields. But there was one door in this house that Calder never opened when she was nearby, his late wife's room. She never asked, and he never explained. But that afternoon, while searching for thread to mend Maisie's dress, Naomi noticed the door slightly ajar, open by a line as thin as a strand of hair. She hesitated, then stepped closer. Inside, the late light fell in a slanted gold, painting the room like a memory still alive. Calder sat on the edge of the bed, head bowed, his broad back drawn in as if the weight of grief had shrunk him. In his hands was a shawl, pale lavender, still carrying a faint scent of worn lavender. He lifted it to his face, not crying, but each breath tearing the silence into small, frayed pieces. Naomi wanted to turn away, but her feet wouldn't move. Only when Calder sensed someone there did he look up sharply. "Naomi." His voice was rough, not with anger, but with the fear of being seen without armor. She didn't apologize. She didn't say she hadn't meant to intrude. She simply stood there, hands folded, humble but not small. "I only came to get some thread," she said gently. "I didn't mean to intrude." Calder set the shawl down and exhaled, a breath carrying months that had never healed. "It's not your fault," he said. "I just haven't learned how to put the past down." The words fell between them, and neither dared pick them up. That evening felt longer than any before. While cleaning the kitchen, Naomi lifted a pot too hot, and the rim scraped her wrist. She flinched. Calder came to her side at once, faster than she could react. "Let me see." Not an order, not a request. Simply the voice of a man who couldn't hide concern in time. His fingers touched her wrist, only for a brief moment, yet enough for warmth to travel down her spine. Naomi didn't pull away. Calder wrapped the red mark in clean cloth. The gesture was simple, but careful and quiet. The quiet of someone who had known loss and feared losing again. When he finished, Naomi felt heat rise in her eyes without knowing why. Another day, Calder worked heavy labor near the horse pens, shifting timber to repair the fence. When he came inside, the back of his shirt had split open, and blood showed in a dull streak. "What happened?" Naomi asked. "It's nothing," he said, sharper than intended, but not trying to push her away. "Let me see." This time, it was Naomi touching him. She washed the wound with warm water, her hands so light that Calder turned his face aside to hide an odd shiver in his eyes. Naomi saw the old scars, the lines of fatigue on the shoulders of a man who had carried too much for too long, and she understood. That was why he kept her at arm's length, the fear of losing someone he let himself love. Maisie, sensing something shifting, began to smile more. The first was a small giggle when Naomi taught her to braid her hair, then a louder one when Naomi told a story. And one afternoon, when Calder came home, The girl ran to the porch, her mouth bright with laughter. Calder froze. He turned away quickly, but Naomi had already seen the redness at the bridge of his nose. That night, Naomi passed by Calder's room. The door was not fully closed. She didn't intend to listen, but his voice, rough, worn, honest, made her stop. She saved the child. A long silence. And she's saving me. Naomi stood outside, her fingers gripping the edge of her dress, her heart stumbling. Not because of praise, not because of some fragile affection, but because, after days of walking on strange ground, she finally felt her feet find a place to stand. And someone inside, though he didn't say it, was opening the second door in this house, the one in his heart. The early days of June brought warm winds to Wright Ranch. The sky felt higher, the sun gentler, and the fields behind the house began turning a thin green, like the first promise of a new season. After weeks of watching Naomi from a distance, Calder finally spoke, asking her to join him as he checked the ranch. It wasn't an order. It wasn't because he needed help. It was because he wanted to. "Would you come with me?" he asked, looking down at his boots as if the question were too personal. Naomi hesitated for a heartbeat, then nodded. "I will." Calder prepared 2 horses. The one meant for Naomi was a gentle mare named Clover. As she placed her foot on the stirrup, a gust of wind hit, making her lose her balance. Calder reached out on instinct, his warm, broad hand steadying her from the back. "Slow," he said, his voice firm but quiet. Naomi felt the warmth of his touch through the thin fabric of her dress. The moment didn't last long, only seconds, but enough to send her heart into a quick, startled beat. As they rode out into the fields, the west wind blew hard, sweeping Naomi's hair behind her shoulders. A strong gust pushed against her, making her lean on the saddle. Without thinking, she tilted slightly toward Calder, just to stay steady. But he stiffened, not from surprise, but from the strange ache of something familiar and distant, the warmth of another person beside him. He turned his head slightly, seeing Naomi trying to compose herself, her lips pressed together in embarrassment. "You all right?" he asked, his voice lighter than the wind. "I'm fine," she whispered, though her chest felt tight, as if held in someone's hand. At noon, rain rolled in suddenly from the mountains. They urged the horses toward a small wooden shed the cowhands used when the weather turned. Inside, it was only the 2 of them. Rain hammered the roof like a drum. Their breaths mingled in the amber dimness. Calder stood by the doorway, his shirt partly wet. Naomi stood behind him, rubbing her hands together for warmth. For a few long seconds, they looked at each other. No avoidance, no awkwardness, no need for any explanation. Only their eyes, longer, deeper, as if each was trying to read the other without speaking. Calder swallowed. Naomi was the first to look away, though her breath caught in her throat. Neither named the feeling, but it was real, as sure as the damp air clinging to their hair. By late afternoon, the sky cleared, and Maisie ran out to the porch to greet them. Her face shone, her eyes wide like bright stones. "Papa, Mama, together!" The words came out whole, the first full sentence she had spoken in months. Naomi froze. Calder seemed pinned in place, unable to move. "Mama," Maisie repeated, pointing at them, her tiny hands touching both adults. "Together." The words filled the house. Naomi's chest, Calder's breath. Naomi knelt to hold Maisie, her face pressed into the tassel, child's sun-warmed hair. Calder stood there with his hand gripping the doorframe, as if steadying himself against a wave. That evening, Naomi stood on the porch cleaning mud off her boots. Calder stepped out and paused beside her, not too close, but no longer keeping the distance he once held. "She called you mother," he said quietly. "I know," Naomi exhaled. "I don't want to replace anyone. That's not it." Calder shook his head, his eyes fixed on the dark stretch of earth before them. "It's just, she hasn't called anyone that since Sarah died." Naomi stayed quiet. Then she spoke gently. "You're afraid to love again." Calder stiffened, the words striking the place he tried hardest to hide. "I don't get to," he said, not looking at her. "I did once, and lost it. I don't know if I can bear losing again." Naomi's hands tightened. "But you still asked me to come. You let me near Maisie. You let me near you." Calder turned toward her, his eyes carrying both gratitude and pain. "That's the problem, Naomi," he said. "You're opening doors I locked long ago." Naomi looked down at her hands, hands used to kitchens, children, quiet days. But now, they were growing used to Calder's presence beside her. She finally recognized what she had tried not to name. She was beginning to feel. And in the soft dusk of the ranch, Calder stood closer to her than he ever had. A man trying to step past the fear that had held him for years. 4 months had passed since the day Naomi stepped into the house called Wright Ranch. 4 months long enough for the land to shift through 2 seasons, for Maisie to move from silence to bright laughter, for Naomi to learn the scent of wind in every corner of the fields, and long enough for Calder to realize that, despite all his efforts to avoid it, his heart had quietly turned toward her. That night, the sky fell heavy, stacked with dark clouds. Tom, the ranch hand, rushed from the barn to the house. "Calder! Whiskey! She's giving birth. But it's bad." Calder didn't even take a coat. Naomi followed him without needing to be told. In the barn, Whiskey, the mare he had raised since she was small, lay on her side, hooves scraping the floor weakly. Her breath was sharp, her eyes filled with fear. "Breech?" Naomi asked, her voice shaking but steady. Calder nodded. "I need someone to hold her head. Tom's getting hot water. Naomi, can you do it?" "I'll do it with you." Just one sentence, and Calder looked at her longer than necessary. Inside the barn, the oil lamp flickered hard. Naomi knelt by Whiskey's head, her hands pressed to the mare's neck, whispering words she didn't remember later, only that she wanted to calm a creature in pain. Calder worked behind her, strong hands careful and precise. "Come on, girl. We're doing this," he murmured. Sweat slid down his temple, darkening his hair. Naomi watched him through the dim light. Broad frame, shoulders braced, not only fighting to save a horse, but fighting against the fear of losing one more thing in his life. Rain hammered the roof in sharp beats. "Calder, she's weakening." "I know." His voice sounded as if something heavy pressed on his chest. "But I won't let her die." The words made Naomi tighten her hold around Whiskey's head. She understood. Calder always fought until there was nothing left to lose. Minutes passed, long as winter, until Calder breathed out, "All right, all right. She's turning." And then, with a soft thud like relief breaking open, The foal dropped onto the straw, tiny, trembling, alive. Calder cleared its mouth, patted its side until a thin cry rose, the first breath of life. Naomi burst into tears. No time to hide. No need to hide. Calder turned. When he saw her wet face, his expression softened so much she had to look away to keep from breaking. Naomi. He meant to say something else, but couldn't. They stepped out of the barn when the rain had stopped. The scent of earth after the storm rose clean and strange, cool wind brushing over them, but not touching the warmth inside their chests. Calder reached for her hand first. Light, hesitant, real. Thank you, he said, his voice low and deep as soil. I couldn't have done it alone. Naomi shook her head. We did it together. In that moment, Calder looked at her as if seeing her clearly for the first time, not as a bought bride, not as help, but as someone alive, strong-willed, with a steady heart that frightened him by how much it moved him. Nio, you make me, Calder swallowed. You make me want to believe in something I buried. Naomi felt herself standing before something larger than a confession. Wind carried the scent of wet grass. She looked up at him, her deep brown eyes meeting his. I don't need you to promise anything, Naomi said in a small but certain voice. I only need you to be honest with what you feel. Calder stepped closer. The distance between them narrowed to a breath. I can't promise love yet, he admitted, his voice trembling for the first time. But I want to try. With you, if you'll let me. Naomi didn't answer with words. She placed her hand over his chest, right where his heart pounded hard enough that he had to close his eyes. I will, she whispered. Calder leaned down. The kiss came slowly, not rushed, not hungry, as if he feared hurting her. Naomi placed her hand on his cheek, drawing him closer. The kiss wasn't fiery or claiming. It was two hearts touching for the first time without any walls left standing. That night, they returned to the house and walked to his room somehow, but without haste. Calder paused at the door. If you don't want to, Naomi pressed her lips to his sentence, stopping it. I want to, if it's you. The night of intimacy did not rise in noise. Only breath moving together. Only hands trembling not from fear of loss, but from finally finding. Calder touched Naomi as if she were something he had to learn from the beginning. Naomi held him with the certainty of someone who knew she wasn't replacing anyone. She was beginning something new. When the quiet settled, Calder held Naomi in his arms, his forehead resting against her hair. Thank you for being here, he whispered. Thank you for giving me a chance to be a man again. Naomi tightened her hold. Calder, I'm here because I chose this place. Outside, the sky after the storm opened softly. In the small room, they said nothing more, simply lay together. Two people once broken, now connected by a gentleness deep enough to begin healing wounds they had never dared to name. The morning after that night was not bright like in books. No birds singing, no sunlight falling across their faces. Only a quiet space, soft, a little shy, a little sweet. As Naomi woke and felt Calder's warmth right behind her, he was still asleep, his hand resting loosely at her waist, as if even his body didn't quite believe the change. Part of Naomi wanted to stay still, just to feel what it was like to be held. But another part panicked. because from now on, the line between them was gone. She sat up gently. The blanket slid off her shoulder, and the morning breeze made her shiver. Calder opened his eyes. "Naomi?" His voice was rough, tired, warm like old timber. "I just woke early," she said, avoiding his eyes. Not out of shame, but because something larger was shifting inside her, a mix of longing and fear. In the kitchen, Naomi was pouring coffee when Calder appeared. He didn't hesitate as he used to. He didn't keep distance the way he had for weeks. He stepped right beside her, brushing the back of her hand as he reached for a cup. "Good morning," he said, quiet but certain. Naomi startled, not from the touch, but because Calder initiated it. At the table, Maisie watched them with her head tilted like a sparrow. Then she smiled, a wide, bright smile, and ran to wrap her arms around both of their legs at once. Calder sat down, pulling Naomi to sit beside him instead of across from him. A small change. But Naomi felt everything shifting in a direction she hardly dared imagine. The next days were a blend of warmth and uncertainty. Calder reached for her hand when she dismounted the horse, though she didn't need help. He brushed her back lightly when they walked through the doorway. He stood closer, not by accident, but as if his body kept finding hers on its own. One afternoon, while stacking hay, Naomi complained of shoulder pain. Calder said nothing. He simply stepped behind her and placed his hand on her shoulder, rubbing gently. Naomi froze. The touch wasn't romantic. It was more care, attention, affection forming before either could name it. "All right?" Calder asked. Naomi nodded, though her breath faltered. That evening, after Maisie fell asleep, they sat on the porch. The wind carried the scent of grass and soil. The sky was filled with stars, like dim lamps hanging quietly above them. Calder turned to her. "Naomi, I know you're thinking a lot." She looked down at her hands, silent. "You're afraid," he said, each word chosen. Naomi bit her lip. "Afraid I'm just a replacement." The words cracked open a deep, quiet wound. Calder lowered his head, resting his elbows on his knees, his broad shoulders trembling slightly in the dark. "I never wanted to bring you into my life the way Sarah left it," I said. "I'm not looking for anyone to replace her. I'm not trying to fill an old void." Then he turned to Naomi, honest, unguarded. "You don't have to be anyone else, Naomi. You're yourself, and I am learning to love that." Naomi felt her heart tighten, not in pain, but in warmth so deep she had to look away to keep from crying. But the world outside never left anything alone. When Naomi went to town, the way people looked at her was different. Whispers followed her steps. "They say she's sleeping with Calder now. Fast, isn't it? Bet she's wrapped him around her finger. Sarah's girl will call her mother soon." Naomi kept her back straight, hearing every word. But when she returned to the ranch, she fell silent. Calder noticed. He walked to her and placed a hand on her back. A simple touch, but enough to hold her before she slipped into the dark space their words had opened. "Naomi," Calder said, sighing, "I know you're hurt." She looked up, eyes hot. I'm afraid they're right. Afraid I'm only needed because I make your loneliness easier." Calder looked at her for a long time, long enough for Naomi to hear her own heartbeat. "No," he said, steady as the beams holding the house. I need you because you're you, not because you fill anyone's place, not because I pity you, not because I'm lonely. He placed his hand on her cheek, the first intentional touch, carrying a promise. You bring life into a place that was empty, Naomi. You bring laughter to Maisie, and you bring hope I thought was gone. Naomi closed her eyes. His warmth spread across her face, and for the first time she didn't hold back. That night, sitting closer than they ever had, Naomi rested her head on Calder's shoulder, without hesitation. Calder exhaled, long and quiet, like a man finally allowed to let go of years of weight. Naomi, he whispered, my childhood was cold fields. I grew up with duty, with loss, but now, with you here, I'm starting to remember I once knew how to dream. Naomi intertwined her fingers with his, and for the first time, Calder let his own hand lace into hers, natural, as if it had always been meant to happen. Rumors came like late summer heat winds, no one knowing where they began, only that once they blew, no door shut fast enough. When Naomi went into town to buy fabric for Maisie, she caught fragments. She's nothing special, just easy to manage. Calder only needs someone to watch his girl. If Sarah were alive, she wouldn't step a foot in that house. Naomi stood still in the fabric shop, those words snapping in her ear like dry branches. She kept her face even, but her hands weakened so much the cloth nearly slipped. That afternoon at the ranch, she cleaned the kitchen with an uneven breath. Calder noticed, but assumed she was tired. He didn't know that wounds made by others always cut deeper than those made by labor. That evening, Maisie was drawing lines in the dirt with a stick. When she saw Naomi step onto the porch, the girl ran over and clung to her legs. "Mama," Maisie whispered, like wind. "Mama, don't leave." Naomi knelt, her hands trembling as she held her. "What is it, Maisie?" "Townsfolk said Mama go. Mama not here anymore." Maisie pressed her face against Naomi's stomach. "I don't want. Mama, don't leave me." Naomi's heart clenched hard, not because of the rumors, but because Maisie's fear was the same fear Naomi had in her first days, being seen as temporary, as a substitute, as someone who could be set aside when people grew tired. Naomi held the girl longer than usual, but she was the one who wanted to cry first. And she did cry, in the barn, where she went for air. She stood among the scent of dry hay, hands over her face, letting tears fall freely. The worst pain was not the gossip, but that her heart was now tied too deeply to the two people in the Wright house. She feared being seen as replaceable. She feared Calder waking one day to realize she was merely convenient. She feared the door closing again and being the one left outside. Footsteps startled her. Calder. He stood in the doorway, his gray eyes darkening when he saw the traces of tears on her cheeks. "Naomi," his voice rasped with alarm. "What happened? Who hurt you?" She shook her head, wiping quickly. "It's nothing. Don't say that." Calder stepped forward, touching her elbow lightly, as if pressing harder would break her. "Tell me." Naomi lowered her face. "I heard them say that I'm only here because it's easy, that you chose me because I'm not troublesome, because I'm easy to replace." Calder drew a sharp breath, as if someone had struck him. "Naomi," he murmured, almost confessing, "I'm sorry." "For what?" she asked. for making you feel not chosen. His eyes glistened, rare enough that Naomi froze. Because I was so afraid of loving again, I stepped back in case you ever left. I thought keeping distance meant losing less, but it turns out I hurt you instead. Naomi looked up, brown eyes shimmering. I don't want to replace anyone, she whispered. I just want to know if I'm truly part of your future. Calder looked at her, and for the first time, there were no barricades, no shadow of Sarah, no panic from the past. Only the man himself facing what he had avoided. I'm afraid of losing you, he said, each word pried from an old scar. Afraid of loving someone and burying them in the ground the way I once did. Naomi raised her hand and placed it on his chest, right where his heartbeat thudded, uneven and real. I'm here, she whispered, but I need to know. You'll walk with me. Calder closed his eyes for a moment, then placed his hand over hers. I will, he said. Steady, sure. Not fast, not rushed, but I'll walk with you. Naomi exhaled, like someone pulled from deep water. Calder pulled her into an embrace, not possessive, not demanding, but the embrace of two people who finally admitted how much they mattered to each other. In the barn's darkness, with the smell of hay and wind slipping through the boards, they stood there, two souls once afraid of love, now choosing gently, slowly, but clearly. We'll walk slow, Calder said, his lips brushing her hair, but we'll walk together. And for the first time, Naomi knew that those words were a true promise. Calder had spent many nights thinking before he spoke the words, not because he doubted his feelings, but because he wanted to be certain that once he opened a door, he would keep it open. One night, after settling Maisie into bed, he stood at Naomi's doorway. The wooden door was slightly ajar, the lamplight catching her hair in a thin rim of gold. Naomi, he called softly. She looked up and set her book aside. What is it? Calder drew a deep breath, like a man about to step into a new season. You don't have to sleep here anymore, he said, low but steady. If you want, you can come to my room, not out of duty, not because of that night, but because we're building a real family. Naomi looked at him for a long moment. Then she stood, stepped toward him, close enough for their breaths to mingle. I want to, she said. One sentence, enough to close every remaining distance. The next morning, Maisie woke earlier than usual. When she stepped into her father's room, she found Naomi sitting on the bed, her hair loose around her shoulders, helping Calder button his shirt. Maisie froze for a heartbeat. Then she ran forward, wrapping her arms around Naomi's legs. Mama! Her voice rang clear, whole, sure, so sure that Naomi brought a hand to her mouth to stop tears. Mama stays, Maisie whispered, holding tight as if afraid a gust would take her away. Calder looked at them, the woman he chose and the child he loved without having to learn how. For the first time since Sarah's death, something inside his chest eased. Perhaps this was what it meant to live again. At breakfast, Maisie sat between them, holding Naomi's hand in her left and Calder's in her right. Her small eyes sparkled, as if she understood something was changing. Calder glanced at Naomi. In that look, there was no hiding, no fear, only deep gratitude. You all right? He asked softly. Naomi nodded. I feel like I belong here. Calder turned away for a second, as if to hide how his heart swelled at the words. A week later, Calder decided to take Naomi and Maisie into town, not to shop, not to announce anything, simply to stand together as a family. He held Naomi's hand openly in front of everyone. No hesitation, no concealment, no fear. Whispers still lingered. The West was slow to change. But for the first time, Naomi felt something soft within those looks. Some people greeted her. Some smiled at Maisie. Even the general store owner said, "The girl seems happier with you around." Naomi didn't answer, but her heart struck hard, like a quiet thank you sent skyward. That afternoon, Calder led them to the small photography studio at the end of town, where old cabinet portraits hung along the walls. The photographer polished his lens, studied them, and nodded. "First family picture?" Calder didn't correct him, didn't deny, didn't say no. He simply placed a hand on Naomi's back, guiding her a step forward. "Yes, my family." Naomi's chest softened like grass after rain. They sat on the wooden bench. Maisie perched on Naomi's lap, her little hands gripping her dress. Calder rested one hand on Naomi's shoulder, the other holding his daughter's. The photographer draped a cloth, then said, "Hold still." In that quiet second, Naomi looked straight into the lens. But what she saw wasn't herself. She saw the Naomi from 4 months earlier, lost, frightened, sent away like a debt to be paid. And she saw the Naomi of now, held, chosen, called Mama, standing between two people becoming her new life. When the image was developed, the photographer handed them the preview. Naomi raised her hand to her mouth, breath catching. For the first time in her life, she saw herself in the shape of a woman who was happy. Calder stood behind her, looked at the picture, then looked at her. "Look at you," he said, his voice low and soft as evening wind. "I see a future." Naomi smiled, not the timid smile of old days, but the smile of a woman who had finally found the place where she was chosen. Not by arrangement, not by fate forced upon her, but by the hearts of two people walking toward her. Autumn came to Wright Ranch with thin bands of mist lying across the fields. Naomi usually sensed a new season through deep breaths, warm breakfasts, and the sound of Maisie's small footsteps running across the porch. But this morning, she felt nothing except a lingering dizziness, like a door slammed by wind. Naomi placed a hand on her stomach. The second time this week, her heart pounded. Impossible. Or possible? She hid the worry carefully, but the sudden surge of nausea betrayed her. Calder noticed before she said a word. That afternoon, when Naomi set a bowl of soup on the table, her hand trembled. Calder stood, came to her, his hand resting on her back in the instinctive wanta he had learned. "Naomi, you're not well." She swallowed. "I'm just tired." He looked into her eyes, a look that gave her no room to hide. "You're keeping something from me." Naomi lowered her face, her throat dry as late summer grass. "I think I might be pregnant." Silence. Not the empty kind, but the kind where a crack spreads quickly. Calder stepped back. His eyes darkened, not with anger, but with fear. Fear so sharp it curled his hand into a fist. "Naomi, His voice brushed the air like wind across dry wood. "Are you sure?" Naomi nodded. Calder turned away, bracing a hand on the table, breathing hard like a man trying not to collapse. Naomi stood for a long time, long enough to see the shadow of an old fear settle on his shoulders. "It's because of Sarah, isn't it?" she asked, her voice light as dust. Calder closed his eyes. Her name, a name he hadn't spoken in so long, tightened his chest. "She died while carrying our second child," he said slowly, heavily. "I lost her in one night. One night, Naomi. Just one." Each word cut Naomi like a small blade. "Calder, I'm not her." "But you could become her." He burst out the words, then immediately stepped back as if afraid of his own voice. "I can't lose again, Naomi. I can't bear it." In that moment, Naomi didn't see the strong man of the ranch. She saw a widower shaking under the possibility of reliving the worst night of his life. But his fear struck her heart in return. "What are you saying?" Naomi asked, her voice trembling but steady. "Are you so afraid that you don't want this child?" Calder flinched, turning sharply toward her. "No, not that." He stepped closer, but Naomi stepped back, tears rising. "I just don't know how to keep from losing you." It was the first real argument they had. Not loud, not cruel, but the kind that came from two wounded hearts, both afraid, both loving in different ways. At last, Naomi walked outside, leaving Calder in the kitchen, hands braced on the table, breathing like a man who had raced his past and lost. That night, he found her on the porch. Naomi sat wrapped in a blanket, staring at the fields swallowed by darkness. Calder sat beside her, leaving a respectful space, the space of someone asking permission. "I'm sorry," he said quietly. Naomi didn't turn. He continued, "I'm not afraid of the baby. I'm afraid of losing you. Losing you would be like losing a part of myself." Naomi bowed her head. "I'm afraid too, Calder. Afraid of becoming a burden. Afraid what happened to Sarah could happen to me. Afraid I'm not strong enough to bring a child into this world." Calder clenched his hand, then slowly reached for hers. "Naomi," he said, low and honest, "I let my fear hurt you. But I swear, this time, I won't let you face any of this alone." Naomi turned toward him, her eyes red but deep as water after rain. "Do you promise?" Calder closed his hand around hers, not tight, but steady as an old tree root. "I promise," he whispered. "I'll be here. I'll protect you. I'll keep you safe. I'll never leave you alone." Naomi exhaled, as if laying down a heavy stone. She leaned her head onto his shoulder. Calder wrapped an arm around her, drawing her close. In the quiet night of Wright Ranch, among darkness and the hum of crickets, two people once afraid of love sat pressed together, not because of passion, but because of a promise strong enough to stand against everything that came before. That night, a snowstorm fell over Wright Ranch, as if the whole sky dropped at once. Wind tore across the fences, snow struck the windows, and the wooden house shook under each heavy gust. Naomi woke to a sharp pain crushing her abdomen. Not vague, not passing, the kind that folded her in half, her hands gripping the bed frame. She whispered, "Calder." He rose instantly, as if he had been waiting months for this. But when he saw sweat beading along her hairline, his face went pale. "Naomi, is it time?" His voice trembled. She nodded, lips tight as another wave hit. Maisie, hearing the noise, ran from the next room. Snow dotted her small feet where wind pushed through the cracks. "Mama?" Her voice shook. "Mama, don't go!" The words cut Naomi differently, not in the body, but in the heart. She forced a soft smile. "Mama's here. Mama's not going anywhere." Calder pulled Maisie close, but he was the one shaking. He fed the fire, tried calling for Liz, the midwife, but the storm sealed every road. No one was coming. Only them remained. A man haunted by the past. A woman fighting to live. A child begging not to lose again. Naomi gasped as the contractions tightened. "Help me sit," she said, her voice strained. Calder lifted her against the pillows, his hands colder than the wind outside. "You need to breathe," she said, though she herself struggled for breath. Calder nodded hard, anchoring himself to the one task he could do. "I'm here. I won't leave." But his hands, when they held hers, still shook like a man standing at the edge of a cliff. The pain surged, deep, relentless, as if her body were pulled between holding life and falling into the dark she refused to imagine. Calder leaned his forehead to hers, his breath warm and uneven. "Naomi, look at me," he said, fighting to steady his voice. "You have to stay. Please, stay." Naomi gave a thin smile, though her eyes glistened. "I'm trying. Don't be so afraid." "I fear no storm, no death, no cold." His voice broke. "But I fear losing you." Another contraction bent her toward him. She clenched his hand, so hard it drove him to one knee, but he never pulled away. Naomi drew air in short, sharp pulls. The pain peaked. She nearly screamed. Calder held her head, his forehead pressed to her damp hair. "I'm here. You're not alone. Not ever." Outside, the blizzard roared as if to tear the valley apart. Inside, their breaths fell into one rhythm, the rhythm of holding on. Naomi gritted her teeth and pushed, remembering the midwife's old instructions. Calder gripped her hand, his own hand throbbing, but he held firm. A quiet plea fell from him, not the prayer of a believer, but of a man terrified of burying another love. "Let her live. Let her stay." Naomi strained, her whole body trembling. Calder felt himself sinking into fear, but whispered close to her ear, "You're strong, Naomi. You can do this. You can." And then, a cry, small at first, then rising, cut through the storm. Naomi collapsed against his shoulder, her body soft as grass after rain. Calder froze. Then tears fell, quiet but deep, as if splitting through old ground. "A boy," he said, voice rough. "Naomi, it's a boy, and he's strong." He laid the small, warm child on her chest. Naomi lifted him, her hands trembling with exhaustion, but her touch gentle as wind. Calder knelt beside her, one hand on the child's back, the other wrapped around her hand. Naomi exhaled, the first true breath she'd taken in hours. Her face was worn, but lit from within. Calder rested his forehead to hers and whispered 3 uneven words. "Thank you for surviving." Outside, the storm still howled, but inside the small wooden house, a new life had arrived. and a family that had crossed the deepest ravine of the past now had one more heartbeat to protect. Winter pulled back from Wright Ranch with the first pale sunlight resting on the roof. Naomi held her baby boy, Samuel, the name Calder chose in a voice so full of emotion she still remembered it. He slept quietly, unaware he had come into the world on the worst storm night of the year. The weeks after the birth were slow days of Naomi regaining strength. Her body tired more easily than she expected, but something in her eyes, her breath, her smile had changed, as if Samuel's arrival had opened a part of her heart long tightened by fear. Calder stayed close. The things he once believed he could never do, changing diapers, rocking a baby to sleep, mixing formula, became things he now did with a gentleness he never knew he carried. One night, when Samuel cried softly, Naomi tried to rise, but Calder was already in the doorway, lifting the baby and rocking him in his arms. The firelight touched his face, softening the lines of a man who had lived through too much. Naomi watched him and knew she had chosen the right life. Maisie was cautious with her brother at first, but love came quicker than Naomi expected. Each morning she climbed onto the bed, laid a hand on Samuel's belly, and asked, "Did you sleep well, little brother?" Samuel answered with new, breathy sounds, and Naomi watched them with a warmth that filled her chest. One afternoon, when Naomi felt weak, Maisie took a blanket and covered her legs, then sat close. "Mama, rest," she whispered. "I'll watch him." Naomi stroked her hair, her throat warming with a love that needed no lesson to grow. The town's whispers faded with time. No more stares when Naomi walked past. No more murmurs about her past, or Sarah's death, or the idea of a bought bride. Part of it came from seeing Calder hold Naomi's hand at the market. Part of it came from watching Maisie call her Mama, as if she had said it all her life. But mostly, it came from the way Calder looked at Naomi, with no distance left between them. Naomi never needed approval, but when the townsfolk nodded in greeting, when they asked about Samuel, she understood she had stepped out of the shadow of old gossip. She had truly become part of this place. One March afternoon, the wind carried the scent of fresh-cut grass. Calder sat on the porch holding Samuel, settling beside Naomi as she folded linens. Maisie ran about, gathering tiny wildflowers and placing them in her mother's lap. Calder watched them and spoke in a tone that made Naomi pause. "You know," he began, slow and sure, "I've loved you longer than I ever admitted." Naomi smiled. "I guessed as much." Calder gave a low laugh, bowing his head like a man confessing late. "I always thought loving again would betray Sarah's memory." He looked toward the white fence stretching across the ranch. "But you didn't come to fill an empty space. You came to open a door I thought was locked, forever." Naomi placed her hand on his. Warmth passed from him to her, steady and quiet. She didn't speak. She didn't need to. Some love lived best in shared breath, not words. Calder tightened his hand around hers. "I love you, Naomi." This time whole, without fear, without hesitation. Love that wants to walk with you all my life. Naomi leaned into his shoulder, Samuel resting in her lap. The prairie wind carried the scent of damp earth and cypress after rain. "I love you too," she said, "and I love this life." Sunset brushed the land in deep honey. On the porch, Maisie held Samuel, her small legs swinging in the breeze. Calder wrapped an arm around Naomi and drew her close, as if to promise that from now on they would always sit side by side. No more fear, No more proving anything to anyone. Only warmth, a home, and a whole family. Naomi looked out across the fields, her gaze soft as still water. Sometimes she thought of the past, the force, the hurt, the closed doors, the things she once believed had taken her future from her. But now, in Calder's arms with children's laughter in the air, she understood something she might spend a lifetime learning. Sometimes the life we never chose is the life we were meant to be given. And she received it with her whole heart. If this story touched you, feel free to share your thoughts below. I'd love to hear them. And if you enjoy gentle tales like this, please like, subscribe, and stay with us for the journeys ahead. Thank you for being here.